All right, it's now 26 minutes to 8 o'clock. This is Morning Express, and in case you're joining us now, welcome aboard. And today, being Thursday, we'd like to focus and look at police brutality. Of course, there has been concerns world over, but also in Kenya, we have not been left out. And we have statistics of incidences, particularly from the time the curfew was started. And this is just, of course, following up in other cases that have been there. But that's the time that we'd like to look at, and we would like to have that discussion. A quick reminder of that question that we're asking as to whether you think the government is adequately addressing the issue of police brutality in Kenya. Do you think the government is adequately addressing the issue of police brutality in Kenya? We have had instances and incidences where we've had even very young children who have been literally caught in the crossfire, so to speak. And to have that conversation, I'd like to introduce the guest that we have here this morning. And we are joined by Irungo Horton, who's Amnesty International Executive Director. Thank you for joining us, Irungo. We're also joined by Victor Kamau, who is an advocate and head of redress and legal services in the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thank you for joining us, Victor.
Thank you.
All right. But before we continue with the conversation, I'd like us to just focus and maybe to bring into perspective what we're talking about. Police brutality has been on the rise in the past few months. Recently, residents of Madaraka were up in arms against police brutality and held demonstrations to protest the same. Here is a report compiled by BBC's Elijah Kanyi.
Madaraka, Kenya. 500,000 people live here, within 3 square miles. For over a decade, I've been reporting on the issues in my community: poverty and sanitation, overpopulation, and police brutality.
With the COVID, you're supposed to keep a distance of 1 meter, and as you can see, even my hand can't stretch.
So far, Kenya has avoided the worst of the pandemic. By the 25th of March, only 28 cases have been reported, with just 1 death related to coronavirus. None of them were found in Madaraka. But dark clouds are beginning to gather.
There will be a daily curfew from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. with all movement by persons not authorized to do so being prohibited.
The first night of the government curfew is approaching. Madaraka residents know it's the police who will be enforcing it, and they have a history of violence and brutality. Kenya's independent police oversight body recorded over 3,000 incidents of abuse by the police in 2019 alone. In the Huruma ward of Madaraka, I see for myself how police are enforcing the curfew. The very next morning after the curfew is enforced, my community wakes to news of a tragedy.
Kumbe asili vile alikuwa amesimama hapa ameanguka kwa hii kiti hivi. Alafu akaniambia, "Mama, nimegongwa." Mwenyezi Mungu atanilipishia. Inshallah.
A delegation of senior police and local officials have been dispatched to the family home. But even as Yasin's parents grieved, more allegations of police brutality are beginning to emerge. A dead body has been found on the streets of Madaraka. It's claimed that he had been beaten by police during the previous night's curfew.
Alikuwa mbele yangu na polisi wanamkimbiza. Wakampiga ya kwanza, hakuanguka. Ya pili ndo wakamfuata wakimtega. Akuja akampigia hapa hivi kama ameinua mkono juu. Yetu. Kama wanatuona, wajue wanafanya. Si ati kutuletea mapolisi kusema ati watumue. Huu si corona. Kwani ama yeye ni corona ameuliwa. Na ni kupigwa alipigwa na karao.
The investigation is being conducted by the DCI, an independent body, so it is going to be very, very fair. We are very, very open.
very friendly.
But the officers' assurances sound optimistic at best. Over 10,000 cases of police brutality have been reported to Kenya's Independent Policing Oversight Authority since 2013. Only 6 have led to a conviction.
All right, and that's a story that was run on BBC, and shortly we're also going to be joined by an investigative reporter, Hussein Mohammed, who's going to be giving us his experience. But let me start with you, Irongo Horton. And of course, as mentioned in that story, it is not unique that this is happening now, but police violence seems to be something that we have grappled with for a long time, but of course, a matter of concern. Your opening remarks to this and possibly what you think might the problem be?
So first of all, thank you. I think the public concern and outrage at the numbers of killings during curfew is valid. We have seen first of all, a rise in the number of cases of unlawful and excessive use of force by our police officers. There have been 2 spikes. The first spike was in the first week of the curfew, and more recently we've seen this spike happen again. And I think there are, a number of issues. I think we talk about police brutality. I think we also need to shift the focus also to police professionalism, that under the Constitution and under the various acts and the police standing orders, there is an obligation of all of our 150,000 police officers to be human rights compliant and essentially to provide service to the public. They're not there for any other purpose. And for those officers that are not clear on that, they need to be really eased out of the service. And for those that have committed human rights offenses, they need to be arrested and prosecuted. So I think that's the starting point on this conversation. Have we seen things shift in the last week or so? I think, as always, where there is public vigilance and there is public, kind of pressure, you see change. And I think some of the interesting developments is in the case of Yasin Moyo, we have an impending arrest of that officer. The investigation by IPOA and the prosecution formalities have proceeded fairly fast in terms of the standards that we've seen in the past. So within six weeks or so, we now have an impending arraignment of that officer in a court of law.
Okay.
We've also seen in the case, sorry, I was going to give you another example.
Yeah, go on.
So the other example I was going to give is the case of Mercy Cherono. This is the woman that was dragged on the back of a motorbike by allegedly a deputy officer in charge of the station in Olongoreni in Nakuru. And within 48 hours, that officer plus 2 other officers were arrested with members of the public, and they're now going to face charges of assault. And I think this is an example. These are 2 examples of how the combination of collaboration between the investigative and prosecution arms, public vigilance, and also leadership at the level of the Ministry of Interior can actually reverse the cycle that we've been seeing.
Okay. All right. We're also joined by Hussein Mohammed, who's an investigative reporter. And thank you for joining us, Hussein. And of course, by virtue of what you do, you interact and come face to face with some of these police officers vis-a-vis the people who they either, have killed, or rather the families that have had their loved ones killed in some of these incidences. And maybe just to get some insight from you, you've probably been able to interact with them. What exactly is the problem? Is it a case of not getting enough training? There are all manner of excuses that we get from the police, but what do you feel might be the crack of the problem?
Well, thank you for having me, Mike. As Irongo posted, we have different issues we have heard of in the cases of Yasin, the 13-year-old Yasin Moyo, cases of the 2-month-old child who was tear gassed in her own house. But words like police brutality, police killings, extrajudicial killings do not go well in the slums or in places where we have state-sanctioned killings here in Kenya. To them, they talk about the faces, they talk about the people, they talk about who is Yasin Moyo, who is Shamsuddin, the 2-month-old child, who is, as reported, who is Mercy Cherono, who are these people? So when we go down there, we talk to the people, they give us a different scenario because where would they go to? Where would they go to if this is the person? For instance, I'll give an example of a 2-month-old child who was tear gassed in her own house just recently. Mzee Abu took the tear gas which was thrown in their house and took it to the police station. So while he was explaining to me, he told me that I took it and I asked them, you guys, you threw this tear gas in my house. Right now, my young daughter is not feeling well. She fainted. She's having foams in her mouth. I mean, I don't know what to do. So where will they take it? What will happen? So if you ask me the question about police, is it training? Is it, for me, I don't think it's about, training. For me, it's about, I think it's about humanity. Because why would, for instance, why would someone, giving an example of that, why would someone throw a tear gas canister at 6:30 p.m. When everyone is in the house? I mean, people having Ramadan, all the Muslims are in the house. Why would someone even do that? So for me, I think it's all about humanity, and we need to bring the police closer to the people.
All right, and I'll come to Horton on that particular question where you feel the problem might be, but allow me to bring in Victor Kamau, who's an advocate and head of redress and legal services at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And Mr. Kamau, one of the things that, of course, Kenyans are concerned about is that some of these cases, they are highlighted, they're brought to the fore, but we're not sure what really happens. Do these police officers really, are they dealt with? Because we have seen a reoccurrence. Right now, we're concentrating on when, COVID came in and the curfew was brought in, but this is not the first time that we're seeing police brutality. And maybe the question to you would be, first of all, what's the first point that one should have this reported? Because the challenge that we have is that you have a police officer who was assaulted or killed, and you go and report to another police officer. Chances are justice may not be meted out.
Yes, thank you. I think it is very clear, and we have seen this in the few months that have been, that police brutality is a universal phenomenon. And the basic thing that is important is how is it dealt with. Now, clearly, a lot of police brutality, I will admit, gets lost in the impunity. That is our general problem in Kenya. At the Commission, we take very seriously complaints of police brutality, and we receive many. And we work along, of course, with other agencies such as IPOA to make sure that police brutality is addressed. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has the mandate to protect and to promote human rights, and that means when human rights are determined to have been violated, then they can propose or they can engage in taking all steps, as the Act says, to obtain appropriate redress. Many times we have brought cases to court where police have been brutal, and especially when they have extrajudicially killed or summarily executed a citizen or anyone else. So I think that the basic problem is that a lot of times the police brutality is actually abetted and covered up.
All right, Mr. Kamau, sorry to interrupt, but what, in your experience, would be the best way to go? Because it seems reporting police to police is not working for us. Do we need to change that?
My experience is that a lot of times these things will be reported, and of course the first call, port of call is the police. And sometimes there are, I have to admit, there are very good officers who actually try to address brutality by their colleagues. But many times we see that those reports just don't really go, you know, the police who are brutal are defended a lot by their bosses. And I think I have an abundance of illustrations about that. You know, in one case in Migori, we brought a case, the commission brought a case because a person had been disappeared by the police. And the police station that had disappeared him clearly had killed him. It was obvious, even from the records of the police. But we brought the case to court, and the OCS that had been involved was actually left in the police station. Nothing, no punishment, no transfer, nothing.
All right. I'll come back to you, Mr. Kamau, but let me cross over now to Irungu Horton. And you've had for yourself some of the pain that, you know, Kenyans have to go through by virtue of the fact that when we go to the police, there doesn't seem to be justice done. And this, I guess, is what gave birth to the Independent Police Oversight Authority, IPOA. But that hasn't seemed to be effective. Or do you feel that perhaps they're doing a good job, but maybe we need to highlight some of the work that they're doing and maybe just give hope to Kenyans? Because there seems to be a lot of injustice that does not, you know, get dealt with as we would want it to.
So, you know, I think it's...
Sorry, Mr. Kamau. Let me just get Irungu Horton on this. I'll come back to you, Mr. Kamau.
Let me illustrate, you know, some of the complexity of this work for your viewers. You know, in the case of baby Hasnat, this was the 12-month child that was tear-gassed in her home. That tear gas canister was not presented back to the police station on the advice of Amnesty International. It was actually presented to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. In the multi-stakeholder conference that took place about a week ago, under the leadership of the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, we made a very direct request as civil society organizations and as human rights organizations that the Director of Public Prosecutions should essentially refer all cases of police brutality to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority and the Internal Affairs Unit for investigation before he prosecutes those cases, because there are too many cases where the police are essentially investigating themselves. And in some cases, it is officers that are co-located with other officers accused of human rights in the sense that they come from the same police station. So we need to make sure that the accountability systems work, the oversight mechanisms are functional, and that's how we will deal with the incidents as they happen. But of course, the bigger challenge is actually how do you stop the incidents from happening in the first place? And I think there, you know, from our experience as Amnesty International, there are 5 critical stages to ensuring that the criminal justice system works. The first is in the reporting, ensuring that citizens are diligent, that they're able to report and blow the whistle on crimes that take place. The second is the quality of investigations, the quality of the forensic evidence, and so on. And the third one relates to the prosecution of those cases, that the cases are prosecuted and that the justice is not delayed any longer than it needs to be in the cases that we've seen. Carlton Minor's family waited 16 months for a police officer that was known to be arrested and brought into a court of law. That is now a case that is underway, but 16 months is too long, essentially, for an officer to commit a murder and continue to go to the office every day wearing a police uniform, carrying a police rifle, and continue to receive a salary. The fourth area is the judicial process, and in many cases, these type of crimes can take up to 4 years for a conclusion of those cases. We are hoping with the judiciary that this will come down and at least be halved in that sense. And the last one, of course, is custodial. As Amnesty International, we do not believe in the death penalty, even for those people who take lives. We believe that they must be corrected, rehabilitated, and once they are safe, they can be brought back to society. So these are the 4 stages of the criminal justice that needs to take place. And it may seem complicated to the average listener, but actually it's not that complicated. We have the laws, we have the institutions, and fortunately now we have the funding going into the police service and into elements of the criminal justice service or system that allows this to happen. So there are no excuses from either the political leadership or the executive for getting this right. There are too many costs, as Hussein has talked about, too much impact, too much misery in the families that we meet as Amnesty for this not to happen.
All right. Now, as simple as it sounds and as, direct as it sounds, that it doesn't seem to be, going as well as we'd want it to go or as we'd wish it to go. Where do you feel the problem is? What's the weakest link in that, 4-point process that you've given us?
There are basically two, I think, blockers. I think the first is corruption and impunity. And we've not talked as much about police corruption as we've talked about police brutality. But many of the cases that we come across are essentially cases where police officers have tried to extort bribes. They have misused their uniform and their oath of office to essentially prey on the people that they should be doing, they should be providing service to. And the second level, I think, is in society itself. The first thing we have to recognize is these officers are of us. They are Kenyans like us. They are brothers, sisters, parents, and that does not excuse them. So I don't use this in the same way that some have used to excuse them, but it does give us an insight into how we can transform the behavior and the systems within the police service. We can do that, I think, in 3 ways. First of all, is that we need to know and work with the local police stations in our jurisdictions, in our communities. It may surprise your listeners that I spend, probably not as much time, but unfortunately, but I spend probably, I spend a lot of time with police officers, essentially supporting them with either information about criminals in our community, in my particular community, but we also have a community project with the police to make sure that they have PPE equipment, masks and gloves during this time, and that there is no possibility of criminals misusing the curfew period to take advantage. I think the other thing, of course, is citizens who obey the law, who have integrity, who are at home during curfew, who are not either commandeering ambulances or organizing parties during curfew. They are less likely to run into the police service, not just the bad officers, but also the good officers. So I think obeying the public health guidelines is the other way that we keep people safe at this time. And as Amnesty International, we are committed to raising a community, a nation of human rights defenders, not just civilians, but even within the police service themselves.
Okay, and we'll come back, obviously, because we just don't want to make it look like there are no good police officers. We'll come to that. But Hussein Mohammed, by virtue or nature of the work that you do, you're sometimes caught in between a place where, you have to do your work, but here you are face to face with some police officers who may, one, not want to be highlighted, and two, may not fully understand, the scope of their work. And, concentrating on this particular, time where we have the curfew imposed, we have had police officers literally abuse even, journalists and cameramen as they were out and about doing their work, despite the fact that they belong to the category of essential services. How do you protect yourself? How do you ensure that at least you are safe enough to do your story?
Well, that's a very hard question, Mike, because in our line of work, when we are on the field, of course, our work is, for instance, if we're documenting what is happening in the slum areas or what is happening in Nairobi under the backdrop of police brutality, we really tried our best not to clash with the police officers. But the question comes up, when do we do this? Mostly when we cover this, at times we come after this thing has happened. I'll give an example of the homeless man who was killed in Madaraka. They know him as Mbaite. He was recently buried in Meru. this homeless man was killed in a place where he normally sleeps. So once we heard that there's someone who was killed in Madaraka, of course we sent our crew there. But it was not easy to get there because one, the public had already gotten out of their homes. Remember, it was past curfew hours. They were angry. Why would the police kill? And as Zirongo says, the four steps that he has outlined, one of them is quality of investigations. You find that the crime scene was tampered with because the public was there, the police came, people say maybe the bullet could, that shot the homeless man was taken. Still, they're doing investigations, but when we come there, it's hard for us. I'll give another example of what people are calling the killer cop in Isli. Rashid is one of the most feared cops there. Some public say, people say they love him, but for us, we don't believe in this kind of killings, because once you talk to the people about Rashid, they get scared. Most of them say they don't want to talk to you because they're scared, because after we leave, maybe the police will come after them. Case of Yasin Moyo, I spoke with Hussein, the father of Yasin. Hussein tells me, no. The DPP said that justice has been, we have gotten the guy, but he says, no, I'm more scared now. I ask why. I'm more scared because we haven't seen an arrest. We haven't seen someone being jailed. We're just being told that this person has been charged and stuff. So the fear of the public and the journalists down there is getting, every day as we continue to document this police brutality and police killings, it's getting worse.
All right. And we're now joined by Colonel Cyrus Oguna, who is a government spokesperson. And thank you for joining us, sir, and also for your time. And what we are highlighting here is police brutality. I hope you've managed to hear some of what we've talked about so far. But Kenyans are aware that police had, there was a setup of police reforms that was coming in place. In your opinion, what would you say on behalf of government? Because it doesn't seem to have worked, with at least 6 people dead within the first 10 days of the curfew imposed on the 27th of March. Right now, we have IPOA investigating 15 murders by the police. And this is just from the time of the curfew. It really would seem that the police reforms have not worked at all.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. Indeed, the government now position is that all police operations are supposed to be conducted within the law. And that is very, very clear. And at any time that a police officer goes outside the boundaries of what he's supposed to be doing, then that individual is taken as an individual on his own, not the entire police, service.
Right.
And therefore, there's a lot of generalization that normally take place whenever a case comes up. It's like the entire police officer is involved in that. Police office service is involved in the case. Really, we should be able to isolate a case and deal with it on its own merit, as opposed to generalizing and painting the entire police service as a police service that do not operate within the law. So some of the cases that have been highlighted, I've listened to them, and indeed investigations are ongoing in some of them. Some of them have been completed, but indeed they are being investigated on the basis of an individual police officer having been involved or having been alleged to be involved, but not the entire police service.
All right, and that is true. But would you say that the police reforms are working or not working? Because when a police officer who has been given the huge responsibility to protect the civilian, and he becomes the very killer, that leaves us with a lot of heartache by virtue of the fact that we have put ourselves before them as our protector, but then they turn out to be the killer.
Michael, we are a religious society. Kenya is a very religious society, but within our society still there are bad elements. And it is perhaps not accurate to look at a police service as a colony of angels. Even within the police service, there would be bad apples. So in that sense, even though the reforms are supposed to ensure that we are offering good service to people, majority of police officers are actually providing very, very good service to our people. You know, about 99.9% of the police officers are really providing extremely good service to our people. But indeed, there is a small minority, maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Indeed, like it has always been said, that anytime you build a church, you must also build a cell, because not everybody will be saved. And indeed, anytime you build a hospital, you must also build a mortuary, because not all of us will recover. This is the reality of human existence, right? In as much as we want to have 100% or even 101% of good police officers, we know that they're coming from our own society. They're not coming from another planet. So within our society, there would be bad elements that even some kind of reforms will not be able to reform them. But nonetheless, once they have been found out, then they are chucked out from the service.
All right, and maybe to hear from Irungo Horton, because I understand we may need to release you in just a bit, but just to get your overview and possibly words of advice both to the public and secondly to those in authority in what we need to do to ensure that we have a more effective police service as opposed to a police force.
Allow me to start just by apologizing to my co-panelists. I had said that I would only be able to be on for 30 minutes. We have our annual, or rather our very first national members conference, and it starts in 30 minutes. And I will be walking onto the set looking slightly flustered unless I leave this particular studio. So please excuse me if I leave after this comment. I think there are a number of things. First of all, I think it's extremely important. The point that the government spokesperson is making is extremely important. It is important at this point not to overgeneralize, not to stigmatize the entire police service, but to recognize that there is a behavioral and a systemic problem with regards to the respect for human rights within the bulk of the officers. I think if you ask the average Kenyan civilian, what is the percentage of our police officers are people of integrity and are people that respect human rights, you probably would have a reversal of those figures. I mean, it probably would be 99% of the officers are corrupt and, are violent. And 1% are the good ones. I mean, this is the perception. I think public perception matters. And that's why it's very important, I think, for the police spokesperson, the Inspector General, and the leadership of the police to take this very seriously. I think in reality, neither of those two are true. It is neither the 5% nor the 95%. And obviously, we have no statistics to do this properly. But I think I would see this, more in terms of an 80-20 look, which is that, as we were told while we were in the stakeholders conference, there are 171 cases against police officers for some violation of human rights or the other. 23 of those cases are murder cases, and therefore they are serious crimes under our statutes. And I think anybody, even if we can't agree on the specific numbers, will probably agree that this is too much for a modern professional police service. And I think the public demand is really that the Inspector General demonstrates zero tolerance for any officer that is involved, that there is immediately disciplinary action or administrative action that is taken, that from the perspective of the oversight authorities, that those officers are investigated thoroughly and they are prosecuted extremely quickly to make sure that there is no possibility of repeat offenders. Your journalist Hussein spoke about Corporal Rashid in Eastleigh. There are at least 5 to 10 officers that have been accused, and at this point we should say accused, of murdering a number of people, not just once, but severally. And I think this is critical. In the case of Corporal Rashid, it was actually captured and has been played to millions of people, including the international community. And I guess the question that we would ask, like was asked in Minnesota, when Derek Chauvin, the police officer that strangled Big George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. In his case, he was a serial offender. He had done at least 13 other cases of violations of police code. And the question we need to ask is, how long are we going to tolerate officers that serially abuse our laws and abuse our principles of human rights within the police service? And the question there is not really for those officers, it is for the commanding officers to answer.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Irungo Horton, and we'll release you, although would have loved to have you a little bit longer, but I guess because of other duties, we'll have to do that. But coming to you, Victor Kamau, advocate and head of Redress in Legal Services, KNHCR. Question is, there seems to be a very long route for one to get justice, particularly when it involves police. What is your advice to the general public on one who has possibly, who feels that they need redress on their case?
Yes, my general advice, first of all, is that it is actually an issue that the public also need to take up. If you are a victim of police brutality, you need to realize that cowardice will not help. You have to report the case and you have to be persistent. Don't be afraid even when they threaten to kill you. And I know that is much easier said than done. But honestly, if we are to do anything about redressing police brutality, we need people to be fearless and come out and actually report these incidents. I personally would say that we try our very best to protect the human rights of Kenyans. I would say we have several challenges, including the challenge that once a police officer has done anything like beating you up, and I think we've seen this over and over again, they will move to actually threaten you and say, you know, if you go anywhere, I'll sort you out. And that seems to end the cases. But even where the victims are persistent, we need to still work with the state institutions, police even, to bring these people to book. And the thing is, I would advise members of the public, we must soldier on. Okay. This is not going to stop unless we are fearless.
Until we are fearless. We're going to take a short break, but I'd like us to just stay on, and when we come back, we'll take the closing remarks as we wrap this up. We're talking about police brutality, and for those of you at home, remember, you're welcome to participate. And the question that we asked, do you think the government is adequately addressing the issue of police brutality in Kenya? Would love to hear